Well, good afternoon, everyone. We're gonna give everybody a few folks. I'm Casey Wasser, your host. So we're gonna give folks some time to get logged in and try to get kicked off around 12:02. Good. It looks like we've got people filtering in nicely. I'm gonna have to figure out how I can get a background like Scott's got there. I assume that's a soybean plant, so I might need to get me one of those.
Talk to talk to comms.
That's exactly right. I'm not tech savvy by any means. I don't pretend to be. All right, we'll give it one more minute here before we get into introductions. All right, I say we go ahead and get this kicked off. Again, I'm Casey Wasser. I'm the Chief Operating Officer and Senior Policy Director for the Missouri Soybean Association. I am your host today. I'm very excited about this Farm Bill webinar. It's very timely, and we have three really good guests that can speak in detail about the Farm Bill. We're going to go through and let them do introductions, and then we'll get into a good discussion. I want to let everybody know there is a Q&A box. You should be able to type questions into. So if you have them as we're going, we'll probably wait till the end. But if something pops up and we can get to it at that time, we will. But we encourage you to use that if you so choose. So first, we'll let Scott Brown with the university introduce himself.
Thanks, Casey. I appreciate the chance to be on the webinar here this afternoon and talk about Farm Bill issues. So again, my name is Scott Brown. I've been at the University of Missouri now for a little more than 35 years. I've been doing farm policy for much of that period of time. So appreciate the chance to be a part of this today, Casey. Thanks.
Absolutely, Doc. Appreciate you being on. Pat, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself, sir?
Sure. Thanks a lot for the opportunity, Casey, and good afternoon, everybody. Pat Westhoff, Director of the Food and Agricultural Policy Research Institute, better known as FAPRI, at the University of Missouri. I'm a newcomer to the University of Missouri. I've only been here for 27 years.
I love it. Thank you, Pat. And Scott Gerlt.
Good afternoon, Scott Gerlt, Chief Economist at the American Soybean Association. Very happy to always work with Missouri. I'm actually a Missouri native myself, and before I was in this role, I was at FAPRI, so working for Pat and with Scott Brown back in the day. So I've learned a lot from these guys over the years, and glad to be on a panel with them.
Awesome. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining us. Appreciate the introductions. I think to get things kicked off, let's kick it over to you, Doc Brown, and you've got a really good understanding of the history of the Farm Bill, your expertise there. I think it would be good for our listeners if you maybe set a little foundation for the history of the Farm Bill, some of the struggles or positives that you've seen over the last few Farm Bills, and then we'll go from there.
That sounds good, Casey. I think we could spend the entire hour trying to figure out the history of farm policy, but I'll condense it into a few minutes here. So I always like to at least start by saying, since the 1930s, we've written 18 farm bills. I say we, Congress has written 18 farm bills. I always remind us that we'll write a farm bill when we have enough votes to do so. Although we talk about kind of a regular cycle in writing farm bills, everyone's different in terms of there is no regular cycle. I think when you look at just the changes, and I take a little bit of time, given that I've been in a few of these, to remind us of just how much evolution has happened over the long term. If you think back to the 1980s, we were probably more worried about excess supplies of some of our commodities and how we managed those excess supplies in a way that helped get prices to reasonable levels for producers, we're a far cry from where we were in the 1980s. When you think about the kinds of policies that we have in place today, crop insurance being, one of the more important growing pieces of that farm safety net, and gone are the days of set asides and so forth to try to keep prices higher. I think it's important just to set the stage for that kind of change in terms of how we've done farm policy. I'll remind us that I think oftentimes we're trying to find a safety net that is strong enough to provide support when it's really needed, at the same time not being too strong. Again, I go back to the 1980s, and I can find times where I think some would have suggested we had safety nets in the early part of the 80s too strong. My dairy policy experience will say milk producers did not like price supports that were too high, that pushed prices right to support levels. And so finding that balance is really difficult, and it changes. When I think about writing farm bills, I always say it's tended not to be one side of the aisle or the other side of the aisle. It's tended to be this emphasis by rural legislators to find ways to create an adequate safety net. Farm bills have always been a balance between what I might call traditional farm policy, as well as then other pieces. And here's where we can talk about things like nutrition programs being important. We have some pretty recent history of when you try to separate nutrition and traditional farm policy, it's hard. I'm not sure you have enough votes today or ever have had enough votes to get a farm bill done without the combination of the two, even though some may not like one piece or the other. As we think about where we sit today, the 2018 Farm Bill, I believe Congressional Budget Office May 23 scoring would have suggested over the next 10 years about a $1.5 trillion budget. Actually more than we would have suggested when we enacted the 2018 Farm Bill. That spending increase, nutrition programs take a big part of it. And yes, nutrition programs are a large proportion of the overall Farm Bill spending. I don't want to say otherwise. Crop insurance expenditures are also higher than was originally projected back when the 2018 Farm Bill was passed. I always say it's always tough to predict when the next Farm Bill is going to be done. I think enough pressure needs to come to bear that comes from a number of different groups, including farmers, to get a Farm Bill to the finish line. But when Congress is ready and have looked through all the different options, sometimes Farm Bills can come together really quickly. I don't want to predict when this one comes to the finish line, but I think there's still some uncertainty as we look ahead. So just a few minutes to get us started, and I'll try not to dominate for the rest of it.
No, it's great points. And, it's funny because before we started, and listeners don't know this, but the four of us were talking about when do we think this Farm Bill is going to get done? Not a single person wanted to take a shot at that. It's kind of like predicting an election anymore, right? There's no silver bullet to any of this. There's no right answer or wrong answer. It seems like things are getting more and more difficult. But you brought up the CBO scoring in May of 2023. And I think that's one of the complexities that you talked about, getting the safety net right. And that is a very difficult balance as we're moving forward, because really everything's coming down to dollars and cents right now. We got a government shutdown that's about to occur. And we're extremely lucky, and our listeners are lucky to have Pat on this call. And Pat, I'm going to kick this over to you, but why don't you give us an understanding of the role that you and FAPRI play, and then also the complexities of how CBO scores things, and maybe when you pull one lever, what that means for something else.
Right. So our job at FAPRI is to look at alternative policies. So what happens if there's a change in a provision on the commodity program side, on crop insurance or whatever? What might that mean for everything from government outlays on farm programs to the price of corn, to the demand for soybeans, to farm income, all those different measures. So we've done a lot of work this Farm Bill cycle looking at various options that staff in the House and Senate have been looking at to help them understand what the implications might be of some of those proposals. We're doing this kind of parallel to some of the efforts of the Congressional Budget Office. So since the 1970s, it's been either the law or at least the norm in Congress that almost all major pieces of legislation have to be evaluated by CBO to come up with the estimated impact on government spending. The current rules are effectively that you're going to look at how a piece of legislation might change government expenditures over the next 10 years. So the starting point is if you keep current laws in place, that's what we call the baseline. So the CBO and we would be developing baselines out at least 10 years in the future. They'll look at what we think, given what we know today, what the future might look like for commodity prices, and therefore expenditures on things like the price loss coverage program, crop insurance, like that all depend on what the price of corn might be, what production of different commodities will be going forward. That baseline then is kind of the starting point for discussions. There is no formal agreement, at least not that I'm aware of at this point, about what the budgetary target for the current farm bill should be. In the 2018 farm bill, there was an agreement early in the process that bill should neither increase nor decrease the deficit relative to a simple extension of current law. If you look at the final package that was passed, and CBO evaluated it, the net change in expenditures out of an $807 billion bill was zero to the nearest $1 million. So that was a very seriously taken target in that farm bill debate. So said this time around, there's still no agreement what that should be. Some folks are working on the assumption that it will be a no net change in outlay baseline or farm bill, I should say. Others are, arguing for additional resources, at least for certain titles of the farm bill. That has not been resolved at this point. And I can tell you from the various options we've been looking at, different players in the process have very different assumptions about what that target should be for particular titles of the farm bill. So that's going to be one of the major things to try to sort out. The CBO folks do a very good job. I would never want to denigrate the work that they do. They're good people. There's only two of them that work on the commodity program side. So they get very inundated this time of year, not just because of the farm bill, but also because of the appropriations bills that are trying to move through Congress as well. So they have a lot of work on their plate. We try to provide some help that can actually take some things off their plate, look at some options that people are looking at before they get to the more near the end of the process type stage of things, and maybe help weed out some of the ideas that probably don't make sense even to the folks who are proposing them to try to get beyond those challenges. But again, scoring a very important part of this. That's what the Congressional Budget Office evaluations called scores for the farm bill. So what's the change relative to an extension of current law? So the baseline, of course, is very important. If you've got a price for soybeans projected, for example, that's well above the reference price every year, and you knew that was what the price was going to be, a small change in reference prices wouldn't have any impact on the budget deficit whatsoever. CBO knows that we live in an uncertain world. We know we live in an uncertain world, so we look at the variability that might be around those prices to try to come up with estimates going forward. It turns out that relatively small differences in baselines, whether they be the levels of prices or the variability around price outcomes, can have a huge impact on the budgetary impact, not just of the current law, but of options that are being considered going forward. I'll stop there and we'll come back to this, I'm sure, later.
Yeah, no, thank you for that, and appreciate your service too. I know, like you said, there's only two of them. You've got a great team, and I'm sure it goes a long way providing that assistance. I think it's interesting you brought up PLC, and if you look at the 2018 Farm Bill, Scott, you correct me if I'm wrong. I'm going to pitch some of this to you. The reference price started at $8.40, and then of course there was it could go up based on trends throughout the Farm Bill of soy prices, but it simply never triggered. And we're looking at a low volume crop probably this year for soy. And how is the American Soybean Association, Scott, providing data, whether it be to senators, our congressional folks, or even the CBO? How does that work, and how do you advocate for sound policy on behalf of American soybean farmers?
Yeah, great question, Casey. I think the example you mentioned is one we've used a lot. Take the trade war, 2018, 2019. Soybeans lost about a third of their demand, really, with China almost overnight. And if you're going to design a safety net, that's the sort of situation you design it for, right? I mean, nearly immediate structural loss of that much demand. But the safety net really wasn't there for soy. PLC payments did not trigger, during that entire time. Essentially, they never have. And even if you look at ARC, there were some ARC payments, but they were still fairly low overall. And so the scale of the losses was quite a bit more than any corresponding benefits under the Title I programs in the Farm Bill. And so I've written several pieces on this in our economist angle that is spread to the Hill. And we also share that with the Hill so that they understand that, yeah, there's some definite shortfalls here. But more specifically, you know, how do we do this? How do we put things together? We've been looking quite a bit at the issues for Title I that need to be fixed for soybeans. And so we've really put together a Farm Bill priority set, and all this comes originally through the resolutions that the members pass. So everything is going to be consistent, but we try to fill in a little bit more detail about specifics we would like to see based off of some of the shortfalls. We provide that information, try to provide why it is we have those specific asks, what shortfalls, such as the trade war. And so that's a very helpful process. So we've received very good feedback from the Hill on some of our requests. As both the prior speakers, Scott and Pat, mentioned, you know, there's a lot we don't know about the Farm Bill. We have given them what we would like to see. You know, they're working with CBO, with FAPRI right now to try to take requests from all the different organizations, figure out where they want to go with some of those. So we're a little bit of a waiting mode right now on our end to hear back from the Hill on some of those. But there is some information that's coming back that we're looking through. But it's been a fairly long-term process for soy, which we can get into later about why we got to where we are with some of those issues. But basically, you know, there's about $60 billion of CBO spending, I believe, for Title I programs or crop programs. Soy is just a few billion of that, despite being a very large crop by area in the United States.
That's interesting. That's a great correlation. I mean, you know, when I always remember that date, I bring it up. The folks around the soy team get tired of hearing July 6th of 2018 because I bring up that date a lot. But, you know, that's when that 25% tariff went in effect. The retaliatory tariffs came in, and we saw prices drop up by about 20 to 25%. And if the safety net can't kick in that position, it's probably a good signal to Congress that we need to step it up. You brought up trade. And I know that everybody here has an understanding of trade, but I know, you know, Doc Brown, you appreciate that much broader than even just soy. What are some things that you see within the Farm Bill that are extremely important to trade? And do you just have anything to say about trade in general when it comes to the importance of that maybe the price farmers receive?
Well, so number one, I think it's the critical piece here and reminding us that for many of our commodities today, as you look ahead over the next 10 years, the growth in consumption likely occurs outside the United States, not within the United States. Mm-hmm. Growth in population, growth in incomes, that to me says the rest of the world matters a lot. If we want to grow production, it's production that's hopefully destined for outside the United States. If we back that additional production up here in the United States, we know we get lower prices. And so I will often go to the Farm Bill in particular, market access program, the FMD program. Those are critical pieces because I will say all the time, developing new markets internationally is very hard work. It doesn't mean we shouldn't do it. And so being able to invest the time and the dollars in those new markets is a long-term win. I sometimes say that's risk management. In a different way than traditional, I want to go use futures markets to minimize price risk. But I'll say to soybeans in particular, not depending on one country for such a large proportion of what you're exporting, spreading that risk across a number of countries, I think then just says one country can't have such a large impact on us and all of a sudden play the tariff game against us. And so I think it is important, as much as we talk about these domestic safety net programs, and I don't want to downplay those. I do not. However, some of these other things that we see in the Farm Bill equally are important. And I'll keep saying long term, I think the more money we see invested in export development, the better it is for us in terms of creating additional demand for our ag products.
I think that's really important. Please, please.
Oh yeah. That's a great point. So soy just celebrated its 40th year of its office in China. So if you think about 40 years ago, they started setting the relationship to be able to export beans there. And really, it's only been 15, 20 years since China really developed as a large international player in the bean market. So you know, you're going to have 20, 25 years of investment developing the relationships, trying to develop the product demand over there before it ever played out. But boy, I mean, look at the ROI on that. I mean, they buy 60% of the world's soybeans that are traded. You know, nearly a third of U.S. soybeans, and it, you know, as Scott mentioned, I mean, it's the sheer magnitude is a little bit problematic from not being diversified. I mean, there's definitely a risk there, but these things do take a long time, and so that, you know, soy is asking for a doubling of MAP and F&D funds. Those funds have not increased for a long time. At least the government provided portion of those funds have not increased for a long time. So they have a dollar match, and the industry has continued to increase. But those funds have remained frozen. So being able to double those would help quite a bit. And that's actually as far as the overall size of the farm bill, it's actually a fairly small part of the farm bill. So that one probably is not as huge of a lift in terms of dollars and cents, but it's a very important piece of it.
I know it's an important policy position for the American Soybean Association, and it is for us in Missouri too. I mean, we're pretty privileged to have the inland waterway system border a lot of our state here. And you know, if you're in Southeast Missouri, or if you're someone who's actively trying to develop the Missouri River as a way to transport your grain, that's extremely important. We all pray that the water levels on the Mississippi don't fall below what they were last year when we saw movement almost stop. We're heavily dependent on that export market. And then again, that just goes from the relationship, but also things that you're doing within our country to make sure that we can move the grain, whether it's dredging projects. And I'd be remiss if I didn't give a shout out to the checkoff organizations as well, because you talked about MEP and F&D, and they're a group like the United Soybean Export Council, the Meat Export Council, that leverage checkoff dollars with those funds, and they help them go further on behalf of the farmer. And I think that that's just good fiscal conservancy when you look at it that way. And it's something that, to your point, Scott, you have to keep doing. Both Scotts, you have to keep doing. That's your long-term safety net. These other things are extremely important, but I think it is key to where we move forward. I will say we are getting some questions. So I had a few more, but I think it's going to be interesting to hit some of these if you guys are okay with them. This is a great question here. How can Missouri soybean farmers be of help to MSA, ASA, and the university programs for Farm Bill passage? So I am going to pass that off to Scott Gerlt first, and then if anybody else would like to answer.
Yeah. So be involved and reach out to lawmakers. Hopefully the attendee is involved with MSA. And we have hill fly-ins twice a year through ASA, and I know there are other visits that occur outside of that. And you know, we have a dedicated team of lobbyists in DC, and they do a fantastic job. But really, at the end of the day, a farmer coming in and saying, "Hey, I'm having these problems," is always going to carry more weight than a lobbyist saying that. So reaching out and doing that, and I think the coordination between ASA and Missouri and other states is great. I think we're all on the same page. We're delivering that same message. And so they're hearing it over and over. So continue to do that. When lawmakers have recesses, you know, oftentimes they're doing town halls in your local area. Go to those. Let them know what the priorities are, what we would like to see. So I think providing that information, talking to your lawmakers is one of the best things you can do to help move the process along.
So good. Any standpoint from the university? I know that might be a little bit more tricky, but what are your thoughts there? I'll let either one of you take that.
Well, obviously, we're big believers in money for research, right?
Very good point.
No, seriously, letting folks know the value of all the programs that USDA that are funded through the Farm Bill is obviously important. You know, what's important to you, and how can it benefit you, and hopefully it'll benefit the university as well.
Casey, I'll just jump in to say and follow up on Scott's comments about, so producers are the ones that can best send the message about what the issue is. I always say all the time, hone the message. How does this affect your farm? Having been in this process for a while, even Pat and I as researchers, we don't carry the same weight as a producer does going in to have a critical conversation about why this matters to them. And so I hope folks will understand the importance of engaging and through the associations as well about what needs to be accomplished, and those stories on their particular operation. I will say I continue to be amazed at how much those matter at the end of the day in terms of getting a farm built to the finish line.
Those are really good points. And you know, I think I'm always impressed, and I'm not surprised, but I'm always impressed with the way that a farmer can articulate his needs or her needs. It just took a phone call the other day, and we were talking about, you know, are they going to have to extend the farm bill? You know, we need an updated PLC prices. If I can't move my grain and the water levels getting low and I had a drought, there's just this, inputs are extremely high, diesel prices are going up, inputs aren't coming down. You know, these numbers that we are working under from the 2018 Farm Bill, they are not necessarily going to be able to provide that safety net for me moving forward. And we have a great question here. Is there a certain, and I'll let you raise your hand who wants to take it first, because I know I don't, but is there a certain reference price for soybeans that we're hoping for? Whether, and maybe I'll let it from, because it says we're hoping for, maybe I'll pass that off to Scott first, and then maybe there's some, I know, Pat, you've done a lot of work on these numbers and we've talked a lot about it, but Scott, why don't we kick that to you as kind of a reference price we're hoping for soy?
Yeah. So this is actually one of our top requests. There's a kind of a handful of things that are highest priority, and there's certain ways this could be addressed. Yeah, it could be through a statutory reference price where we increase the dollar amount, but there's also the effective reference price, which Casey kind of mentioned at the beginning, that kind of allows that reference price to move up based off of what recent prices have done. So changes to the reference prices really could be done through either mechanism. There's some advantages either way, especially through the effective reference price, because it allows that price to increase through time as we see price inflation. So we've looked at quite a bit, you know, what sort of reference price would help farmers, what would the cost of that be? And we have shared that. We've you know, taken that through our internal steps and have shared that with the Hill. That has not been one that we've published publicly at this point, because you know, everyone's kind of doing their private requests, and the Hill's kind of sorting through that at the moment. So sorry to be just a bit guarded on specific numbers there, but no, we do have specific numbers that we are targeting that would be helpful, but also would be we believe reasonable from a budgetary perspective.
That makes sense. Pat, go ahead if you got any thoughts, please.
So I might just mention that without revealing deep dark secrets, we've been asked lots of questions about reference prices over the last year, and there's lots of complications here that, you know, Scott and others are very well aware of. If you raise reference prices across the board, across all the major commodities, that has larger impacts on payments to some crops than on others. Depending on the size of the increase, you know, you can have a lot of additional spending on commodities you might not think of necessarily as being that larger share of overall U.S. agriculture. And a crop like soybeans, on the other hand, if it's a relatively modest increase in reference prices, there may not be a big increase in payments to farmers. Because again, given where prices are, where they're likely to be, a small reference price increase may still keep reference prices below market prices going forward. So not only would there be not likely to be many PLC payments, but there'd also be a strong probability people stick with the ARC program, the Agricultural Risk Coverage Program, instead.
Yeah, those are really good points. I think it's very difficult again to wave that magic wand, but I know that, like, you got Scott Gerlt and ASA that put a lot of data together. Pat, you've put a lot of data together, and ultimately it all comes down to what can you afford and where do you think you can provide the best support to your producers. I think that's a difficult thing for Congress to have to do, and that's why there's so many different people pulling at their strings trying to get their piece of the pie. There was another question, we hit on it a little bit, the struggles of separating the two titles, and one of the questions was, and I'm gonna blend two of them together, because one is what are the implications if a farm bill doesn't get passed until next year, even 2025, and I'm gonna blend that with have you heard rumblings about separation, because I think the rumblings could cause, right, the delay of the passage of the farm bill. So what happens in those scenarios? And I'll start with you, Doc Brown, if you wouldn't mind.
Sure. So I'm not trying to be anti of separating, but I think if you separate nutrition and traditional farm policy, you almost guarantee yourself no farm bill to the finish line. And I'm not saying we shouldn't separate them, but that's right now what I see as the outcome if you try to do this in Congress. I think the House is going to struggle trying to find a way to get a farm bill to the finish line, and we could still see this idea of trying to separate them. But we'll have to remember it takes, and I think when you look at the House side in particular here for a minute, to remind us that the number of districts that care about rural issues versus maybe more urban issues continues to change. And so I think finding ways to provide something to those more urban districts is important to get to 18 and get us to the finish line. And so if you separate them and you don't get something done, all right, so this is all, I think, a little bit of discussion about what do you do in the interim before you finally get the next farm bill written. We've already heard Dairy Cliff. I sometimes say I'm tired of hearing Dairy Cliff. It happens every farm bill. But it's not the only issue here. I'll just right away cut to the chase and say, if Congress doesn't extend something, then yes, we revert to current law. January of next year is kind of the first big time frame, but other commodities will be affected as well. And I say January, and I go dairy's the one. I remind us that getting USDA to implement permanent law is a monumental undertaking. It will not happen in hours. It will not happen in days. Now, I think that just the hammer of permanent law makes Congress want to do something. It's almost my only sure thing I ever say is that we won't revert to permanent law. I'm less certain of that today than I might have been 15 or 20 years ago. I will say, and so to this idea of when do we write a farm bill, I'll say we write a farm bill when we know there's a real crisis we need to take care of. And we can all question where we're at in that process right now, but I don't see quite the same. So crop insurance has been really good in helping provide that safety net. We could question how well it's going to work going forward. And so I think as the pressure grows, and for me, looking at ag today, this cost price squeeze that could unfold. We know input costs are high. We know the amount of dollars that we have invested in growing commodities has done nothing but go up the past 3 or 4 years. A lot more volatility in the outlook as I look ahead. So I see some things that could get us in a much tougher financial position than what was record farm income of more than $180 billion in the United States in 2022. So a big question you started with, Casey, I just say, if we don't want to get a farm bill to the finish line, I think splitting the nutrition title from the rest of the farm bill will certainly keep us from getting something done. Permanent law will certainly be talked about as we go forward. I just think Congress will do something before we enact permanent law. And the pressure of what comes the next couple of years, as potentially it looks like input costs stay high and maybe our commodity prices continue to move lower. The combination of those things, I think, are what's going to be at play as we try to get to the finish line with the next farm bill.
Either of you two other panelists want to expand on any of that, or?
I could just chip in that, if you think of recent farm bills, we did have one time recently where we, the House side, they split the two into two sections. So passed a SNAP related bill and passed an everything else bill. That was a strategy to get through the House floor. I have no clue what the strategy is going to be this time around to get a bill off the House floor. But on the Senate side, it's really tough to imagine a bill in the Senate that wouldn't be a joint bill of all the major provisions of the Farm Bill that would be able to garner 60 votes in the Senate. And that's, of course, the key number for trying to get a bill through the Senate ultimately.
Yeah, I'll say Soy's stance is that should be kept together. I mean, as everyone's saying here, there's so many interests. I mean, if you look at the Farm Bill, what was it the former speaker Ryan said recently? I mean, it's kind of a nutrition bill with some other stuff in it, but that has wide appeal. It also, think about other things there. There's conservation programs. There's programs for biofuel infrastructure. And so you start looking at the consortium of people. You get the hook and bullet crowd. You get the conservation of environmental crowd. You get the hunger crowd. You get the farm crowd. That at the end of the day, that's what gets across the finish line. It's not. I wish it were the ag Title I crop insurance by itself would, but the reality is there's the number of rural votes by itself may not actually get it there.
Yeah, you guys are pointing out all the reasons, and I think if any listeners paying a ton of attention to what's happening on the House floor and just the back and forths, and I don't even know if you split the two, that you could even pass just a straight farm bill through a Republican Congress right now without their own division. And I think politics continues to get that way. We even see that in Missouri when you have a super majority. It just gets tough. There's a lot of different opinions, but it's well stated often to say, the farm bill, for many reasons, the nutrition title, it's not just agriculture, it's national security. There's so many things. And I hope, to your point, Doc Brown, that ultimately, if you have to revert back to something else that is truly seen as a crisis, I hope they can come together and get it done. We'll see. But that does bring up a good question. Let's say hypothetically they do get it done. If you could wave a magic wand, what would you like to see changed in the 2023 Farm Bill? I think we had a good question here, and I'll just read it specifically so I don't get it wrong. But if you could wave your magic wand, what change would you make in the 2023 Farm Bill to help Missouri soybean farmers? And they said they'd love everybody's answer on that. I'm going to start with Scott Brown or Scott. No, let's start with Scott Gerlt. I won't put you on the spot yet since you're a university. We'll put him on the spot.
So we have to be wrapped up by one.
Yeah.
No, but there's quite a few things I would love to see. ASA held 12 listening sessions, and we also did a farmer survey, and we've just heard a lot of feedback. And so I'll start with one thing that I wouldn't change, crop insurance, or at least I do no harm. One thing we've consistently heard from soybean growers is that it's working pretty well. I think everyone can, I don't know if everyone will ever be fully happy, but it works well. There's processes for making changes otherwise, so we don't really want to change anything there. Getting beyond that, we've talked about some of this already. We would like to see more funding for the Farm Bill, specifically Title I. If you look through time, the outlays in the actual Title I, they've been shrinking significantly. Basically, we've had fixed reference prices or fixed type payments, and as crop prices have increased, that's resulted in lower actual outlays. So we're in a situation where we really don't have great budget for to do a lot, but we also don't have programs that are that relevant anymore. So you either have to find offsets or find new money. We'd like to find new money so we're not robbing Peter to pay Paul to make some of those fixes. As far as some of the specific fixes then in Title I, higher reference price through effective reference price or statutory, voluntary update to base acres. Soy has 52, 53 million base acres, kind of depending what year you're looking at, compared to about 87 or so million planted acres. So there's a significant gap. So an option to update that coupled with those Title I changes would be great. We would also like to see doubling of MAP and F&D funds, as has been mentioned. more research dollars for ag research, as has been mentioned. And I'm probably going to forget some of the other things, very important things in there as well. But as you look at our kind of the I think the big things that would help soy producers on the ground, I think those are some of the top areas that should be changed.
Awesome. All right, I'm going to switch over to you, Scott Brown.
I was trying to go last on this one, Casey, but I'll go second. So it's a hard question. I guess I come at it a little differently, and I'll think about the combination of crop insurance versus ARC and PLC. Is it time for some more evolutionary change, which is not really where we started this discussion on the 2023 Farm Bill? Because I think it's been more of, let's keep crop insurance unchanged, and what can we do in terms of ARC and PLC to make them more effective programs? And if you remember the history of how we ended up with this decision of ARC and PLC, we've kind of lost, I think, a little bit of that. We ended up with it because we had different players in Congress wanting different things in terms of price versus revenue coverage. If we could start over a little bit, would we have better crop insurance? Would producers like a stronger crop insurance safety net at the expense of ARC and PLC, or not? I don't think we're asking those questions. That's very much a research answer to the question that you posed instead of exactly what producers need. I just worry that we have so many more dollars being invested in putting a crop in the ground today that without a change in how the safety net works, it's less effective as we move forward.
And then I'll kick it over to Pat.
Yeah, we've been in business for 39 years because we don't make policy recommendations. So I'm not going to recommend a specific policy today, but I will say that it's probably important to think about both offense and defense, if you will. So on the one hand, what are the things that you want, but also what are the things you don't want to give up? Especially if this evolves to a budget neutral sort of farm bill, where every time you ask for something on the one hand, you may have to give up something on the other hand. Make sure you're happy with the trade-off. I can imagine we've looked at trade-offs that probably would not be beneficial to soybean producers, but to some that are very beneficial to soybean producers. So just being cognizant of that there's often multiple parts of the puzzle, and how those various puzzle pieces fit together is very, very important. Yeah,
that's really well said. And that, Scott brought up base acres. I was going to bring this up potentially towards the end. Someone did ask the question, and it says, I've seen some varying reports on base acres. In the speaker's opinions, what are some positives and potential repercussions of redistributing base acres? And I'll highlight even maybe a little further. We know that the National Corn Growers Association voted to do a mandatory base acre update. But as you redistribute, let's start with maybe Pat, a hypothetical redistributing of base acres. Let's use Scott's example. There's 50 some million base acres enrolled, but we know relatively given from year to year, we're sitting somewhere around 85 to 87, even more million acres of soy. What does a redistribution of those base acres mean in relation perhaps to the Farm Bill?
Sure. And this is one where devil's definitely in the details, right? So we're talking about a mandatory update, a voluntary update, what are the terms of any mandatory, what are the terms of any voluntary update? If suppose you were going to update all the bases to reflect some recent average of plantings, that gives you a lot more base acres for soybeans, gives you less base acres for rice, for peanuts, for wheat, and for a variety of other commodities. Some of those other crops have higher payment rates than soybeans do. And so when you put all the pieces together, depending on the exact terms of the proposal, you could actually save some taxpayer dollars by that combination, but at the cost of really taking a lot of money away from producers in some parts of the country. And that's why that it can be a tough one to try to do for that very reason. A voluntary update has a different set of issues. If you give people the choice of whether to update or not, what are they going to choose? They're going to choose the option that gives them the higher payments, probably, right? And so guess what? That's probably going to cost taxpayer money, all else equal. And so if that's going to cause an increase in the deficit, all else equal, unless you've got unlimited funds to spend, that means, probably something else has to take a cut to make that possible. So you got all these trade-offs involved, and really until you're very specific about just what the proposal is, it's really tough to give a general view of what this might mean. It's one thing to say that, you've got fewer base acres of soybeans than you've got planted acres, and that'd be sure nice to fix that, but you have to understand what the consequences are of the way you fix it.
And I'll mention too from our perspective, because I know when that came out, I received a lot of phone calls, both from folks in DC, but also just constituents, because we got to remind ourselves in the state of Missouri just how diverse we are from agriculture. I mean, we're a top producer of many crops, including rice, cotton, peanuts, and things like that. And so for Missouri to take a stance on something like that could get very difficult for us, because you balance that. And anytime you pick a winner, you're picking potentially a loser, and it gets very difficult. And the devil's always in the details. But I'll pass that on to Scott Gerlt too, if you have some things you'd like to say about that.
Yeah, I agree with everything Pat said. We don't know the budget yet, so we would like to see an increase in funding that would pay for this. But Pat's right. If it gets into offsets, the devil, then you definitely have to watch, making sure that it's a net gain. So as I mentioned, we have ask for a voluntary base acre update, but coupled with other Title I changes, because soybean benefits per base acre are very low. And if you had a voluntary base acre update and no other Title I changes, you probably wouldn't pick up many soybean base acres unless you're allowing new acres in the program, which we are. But if there's just a redistribution of current base acres with no other changes, I wouldn't expect much change. One thing we've heard quite a bit is that there are a lot of farmers, especially beginning farmers, that have quite a bit less than full base for various reasons. And it's as we talk about the safety net, I mean, Title I doesn't apply that well to them. So being able to bring some of those acres in, it would be helpful. So yeah, there's a lot of different ways this could go. So we'll definitely be watching it closely and working on it. But the other aspect I would point out a bit too is we've been talking about the economics of it. There's a political aspect to this as well. And given who some of the members are in key posts, I think a mandatory base acre update has a very tough uphill battle just politically.
I couldn't agree more. Look at the ranking member of the Senate, right? There's a lot of rice production down there. I think that's a key political point. Pat, I always appreciate your just academic point of view and just facts and numbers. There is another piece of the puzzle here that just specifically for Missourians, this question was asked, and we actually talked about this before everyone jumped on. And it says, how big of an impact or benefit does having a member of the Missouri delegation, specifically like Alford, filled Vicky Hartzler's role? So we have Congressman Alford on there now. How important is it that he's on House Ag Committee on behalf of Missouri producers? And whoever wants to take that first, you can raise your hand or jump in. And I've got some thoughts on it too.
Well, I'll say it's big. When you think about how farm bills are written, the committee matters a lot in terms of setting the stage. And having Congressman Alford on Ag Committee gives Missourians a voice in terms of where policy heads at the committee level. So it is very important to have representation out of the state of Missouri. And I think he's hit the ground running in terms of interacting with ag interest and finding ways to best help that safety net development for our Missouri producers. To me, that's always the question of, so safety nets work differently as you move around the country a little bit. So having the perspective from a Missourian, I think is really important. I will add to this discussion. I'm proud of the number of staff also coming from Missouri on ag committees that I think is really important to the development of farm bills. We all have a number of examples of staff we're working with on the Hill that have a Missouri connection. So the combination of what we have going, I think, is really helpful to our Missouri producers at the end of the day.
It's really well said. Any other thoughts on that one? So I've got some as well. And I'll just say, we had Congressman Hartzler, who was a great asset for agriculture. She also sat on other very important committees. But I remember when Congressman Alford announced he was going to run for that race, he came down to Jeff City, and Gary Wheeler, our CEO, and I had lunch with now Congressman Alford. And he said, I'm going to be honest with you, I don't know a ton about agriculture, but I can't wait to learn about it. He goes, I'm going to win this because I'm passionate about it. He said, and when I do, I'm going to do everything in my power to get on that committee because I know how important it is to my district. And he brought down G.T. Thompson and Monica De La Cruz, I believe, from Texas. He brought a diverse group of folks down to the Missouri State Fair. And GT, chairman of House Ag, told the story about Congressman Alford, and he just said, finally, this guy wouldn't stop calling me. So I was like, I got to put this guy on the Ag committee. He's just so passionate about it. And we've been nothing but impressed with his willingness to serve the farmers and listen and really try to advocate for them. So I think that's really important. When you look at the deficit package that was rolling through, he stood up on behalf of biofuels. Biofuels is extremely important to this state, to the economy, to the environment. And he's been a huge asset, and he's got a great staff, like you said. Mizzou's, you should take some credit for some of that. I think some of those staffers have some ties back to the university when they started their days there, maybe through Kaffner. And so I think it's just it's really important. It goes back to what Pat said, just investing in the university side, the research, the great talent that comes out of it, and then having that representation in DC. I think it's shown. We also talked about the fact that even outside of Mark Alford, you've got Congressman Jason Smith. He has the gavel of the very powerful Ways and Means Committee, which he can try to leverage to help farmers. You've got Sam Graves on transportation issues, which are extremely important to us. And all those things help Mark and guide Mark, but he's certainly been a great voice for us. There was one other question. We're getting close to probably having to wrap this up, but I did bring up biofuels because I think Congressman Alford did a great job standing up for some critical tax credits for us. Actually, I would rather, let's do that real quick. So where do you see funding for biofuels applied to? And Scott, girl, I'm going to throw this to you specifically. For example, do you see the funds going to research or applying to specific crops such as covercress or pennycress? And, I'm just going to elaborate on that a little bit. We're trying to expand the soybean crushing industry. I shouldn't say trying to, it has expanded dramatically over recent years, but I think even more growth to come because of the need for oil. What do you see specifically, research or just going to specific crops such as covercress or pennycress?
Yeah, it depends a little bit what funding we're talking about. Some of the infrastructure funding, I believe, is fairly feedstock agnostic. It's just for biofuels infrastructure. There's Inflation Reduction Act funding that depends on your carbon intensity, so that's going to vary by crop. So when we start talking about the government funding side, I'm not sure that that's going to necessarily go to covercress versus soy or anything like that. I think it's going to probably be a little bit more agnostic, and it'll just help support biofuels, which will support all of those. Is how I've seen it.
Very good. And there's one other thing I do want to clarify because it got asked again, and I think this is important because while we don't have the crystal ball, I think there's a good chance that passing a farm bill could be difficult. So I'm going to ask this question that came in again. What happens if the farm bill doesn't get moving, let's say until after 2024 election? With a potential new administration and a new Congress, does that process start over, or how does that work? So I will leave that up to any of the panelists that would like to tackle.
So
Pat, go ahead.
Just from a technical standpoint, if a bill isn't passed by this Congress, you formally start the process all over again in 2025. Now, they could pick up where the previous Congress left off if they chose to, but it would be a new process that would start in 2025. Now, of course, between now and then, you'd like to think you probably would want to have an extension of the current bill if you couldn't get a new bill passed by then, because otherwise, as Scott alluded to, all sorts of weird things happen in legislation because of permanent law.
Gotcha. So there's a scenario in which they don't come to a deal, and I know that ASA I think is advocates for this. Like, if you see the cliff coming, an extension of the current farm bill is better than the alternative. Is that pretty fair from your all's perspective?
Yeah, I think it's safe to say that the permanent law provision is meant to be a hammer to force action to occur, not a realistic option.
Yep. That was a really good question. Lastly, and if nobody's comfortable answering this, let me know, and I'll take some of it too. But it says we know how important checkoffs are to increasing farmers' profitability, but there's been a lot of mention of anti-checkoff legislation. How could this potentially affect farm bill conversations?
I'll jump in on some of that. So the checkoff has over 12-to-1 return on investment. We've seen so we've already talked about two different things in the past without specifically mentioning they were checkoff that are really driven a lot of growth in soy. One, the China, right? I mean, the building of foreign market development is largely done through checkoff on the farmer side. We talked about F&D and MAP. Those have to have matching dollars to be able to receive the government. That's done through checkoff. So essentially the checkoff was the vehicle that was used to invest in growing those that foreign market of China. And that's just kind of the poster child of foreign market development, but it's happening all over the world, and continuing to. The other one, biofuels, right? I mean, Casey, you could probably talk about how biodiesel was developed with checkoff dollars coming out of Missouri. You look at a lot of the growth that's going on in that field. That comes out of the checkoff side. So as we talk about building demand, as we talk about promoting soy, all that's really coming out of the farmer investment through the checkoff. That's been very important, and we have seen a lot more serious pushback from some on the Hill to some of the checkoff stuff through the OFF Act, and also through appropriations through the Sparts Amendment. Interesting. It's like the OFF Act is coming from both sides of the aisle. It tends to be more of the a little bit more of the kind of Tea Party minded Republicans, and on one side, and then on the other side a little more of the I'll call it anti-corporate farming is probably how they label themselves on this. And so that has been a concern. A lot of the things they're pushing for already happen in some way or another, but one of the biggest restrictions would be to not allow checkoffs to do any work with the policy organizations. And so if you can imagine, like Missouri Soy, for instance, that would be a problem, or ASA working with USB, all of those would be problems. And I will mention that no checkoff dollars are used for advocacy. That is against the law, but just the other work that goes on, would be prohibited.
Yeah, I always think it's interesting. To me, if someone tries to wedge the checkoff discussion in the Farm Bill, they're just trying to kill it too, right? We've talked about the bipartisanship of the Farm Bill and how it probably needs to stay that way to get through. And if you don't understand the value that the checkoff brings, and there are either groups or individuals that are wanting to revise what is a assessment that farmers brought on themselves, that is reviewed every 5 years, that a petition does go out to the producers. And I think the last one, it was less than 0.13% of producers. That was about 780 of the hundreds of thousands of soybean farmers that we have in this country, we're interested in a possible petition. So sometimes it's important for Congress to remember to, allow those self-assessment funds to continue, and to allow farmers' voices to be heard through that petition process. I am fearful for the one that asked the question that yeah, it will be part of the discussion. I think it might have been the 2018 Farm Bill where it was allowed to be an amendment on the floor, and it got 38 votes. Maybe that was, but again, that was two very, very different sides of Congress, a far left and a far right, if you just want to be realistic, and I think that there are many attempts to try to divide, and people that are anti-checkoff can use that as a way to divide folks on the Farm Bill. So I hope it doesn't come to that, and I hope that there is a lot. I will say there is a lot of support in Congress. There are resolutions going through that have been signed by members in the House and the Senate, and so a lot of people that are close to agriculture and are close to farmers and hear farmers' voices, those folks support the checkoff because they know how important it is to them. And so I do want to get it wrapped up here. You guys have been very kind to give us so much of your very, very important time. I know that some of you will continue to be deep. All of us actually will be very deeply involved in the Farm Bill in the coming weeks and months. Hopefully nothing longer than that for the next Farm Bill, but we will see. I will leave you with any closing comments or words that you might like to give for our listeners.
Just say thanks for the opportunity, Casey, and hope everybody enjoys the rest of the debate.
Yeah. Again, thank you. Appreciate the great support from Missouri Soy for ASA and some of the things we're doing, and just appreciate what farmers do every day, and feel honored that we can work to help that out.
Awesome. Well, I will say thanks for everybody for listening, and I'd be remiss if I didn't say go Tigers against Kansas State this weekend. I believe that's right. It's Ag Day. Doc Brown, you got anything to say about it?
M-I-Z, right? M-I-Z.
Yeah.
That's right. ZOU, let's pack the house. I hope everybody's going. I heard it's sold out, so let's go Tigers. And thanks for everybody for joining us and listening to this discussion.